Company of Makers, podcast talks, workshops.
We are here because for the first time for many years, British sovereign territory has been invaded by a foreign power.
The task force, with all its power, is ready. Britain has gathered its might. It must set its course. I'm not allowed to say how many planes joined the raid, but I counted them all out, and I counted them all back. We're now between the two gun lines, and there's a right old artillery duel going on between them.
There is a white flag flying over Stanley.
Very marvellous.
Welcome to Land, Sea and Air, Stories from the Armed Forces. In this series, we hear untold stories from the Falklands War, 40 years on. This is the story of the conflict, told by 8 different people who were actually there.
Steve, isn't it about time we had a discussion with someone from the army, someone that was part of the land campaign?
You served in the Royal Navy and you're prepared to let someone from the British Army onto our podcast? Or is it just the RAF?
They do occasionally do some good stuff, and they certainly did some good stuff alongside the Marines in the Falklands 40 years ago.
I don't think there's any doubt about that. We have a gentleman called Gary Steele from 2 Para, and they did, shall we say, to use that phrase, some good stuff.
Oh, well, 2 Para were in the thick of it, and most notably Goose Green, but lots of other stuff as well. I can't wait to hear it.
Let's give it a listen. Gary, thank you so much for agreeing to come on the podcast.
Yeah, no problem. No problem at all.
So there was a bit of a pause there. I think you missed your cue there. But anyway,
yes.
As I've already explained,
doesn't matter.
It's us having a
My
chat.
watch was buzzing at the same time, so I'm just going to take it off.
Distracted already. Crikey,
Yeah,
21
yeah.
seconds in, and it's all over. So back to business. 2 Para.
Yes, indeed. Yes.
Where were you when you heard about the Falklands, possibly for the first time?
Well, I've never. I wasn't really sure where the Falklands was. I knew it wasn't. I knew it wasn't near Scotland, as some people had said afterwards. But I was in a pub in Aldershot called the Queen's Hotel, and a couple of the guys came in with the paper, and they said, have you seen this? And like the general feeling was that we needed to get over there and get down to Montevideo and start kicking some arse. Obviously, geography was not a strong point at that time.
I was going to say, I don't know a lot about South America, but I don't think Montevideo's in the Falklands, is it?
Thank goodness we didn't go over there straight away.
So what happened then? So didn't you go off and do some skydiving or jumping out of a perfectly serviceable aeroplane?
Absolutely. The reason I was in Aldershot was that that I had been previously skydiving in a place called Zephyr Hills in Florida. We came back. I'd spent a week at home with Mum and Dad. And then one of my friends rang me up and said there's a chance to do a bit of skydiving with the Red Devils. They're short of a few guys because they're on holiday. If you guys want to come back early, you can do a few jumps for free. You can jump in from the Sky Van that they were testing. You can jump from the Red Devils aeroplane, which was I think it was a Cessna at the time. So we came back, did a couple of jumps, and I was basically just folding everything up and getting ready to go home again. When, as I say, I was popped down the pub just to say goodbye to everyone, and the news kind of broke.
So when was everybody called back to base then? When what happened?
Well, basically, what happened was, they said that they said in the paper, and obviously you watch the news as well, that the certain battalions were being recalled, and that I knew some of my friends had got a telegram saying Bruneval, which was the name of the barracks. So it was basically, get yourself back to barracks. I rang my dad to see if anything had turned up, and initially I hadn't got anything. So I was still planning to go home up until about sort of, I don't know, 4 or 5 o'clock. I gave him another call just to make sure, and he said, yeah, the telegram's turned up. You're better off stopping down there, I think. So that was it. That was my notification that it was action time.
Action time. So what was your role in Two Para?
Well, so I started in Two Para. I was in D Company for most of my sort of early career in Two Para. But get to a certain age, maturity, and you get the option to go into, well, you basically get the option either to take promotion or go to one of the support sides of the battalion. So some people might go to machine guns or mortars or anti-tanks. I chose to go to the MT section, which was like motor transport. So obviously there wasn't a massive call for heavy goods vehicles in the Falklands because there wasn't any roads to speak of there. So what we did was they formed us into what was called the defence platoon, and our job was basically to provide infantry support to the 2 tactical headquarters. So the battalion HQ was broken down into TAC 1, which was the CO and the adjutant, and TAC 2, which was the 2IC and the RSM. And TAC 2, which I was associated with, I mean, obviously there's probably a bit more to it than this, but the essential role was to be everywhere or anywhere that TAC 1 wasn't. So obviously, if TAC 1 was hit, if we lost the CO, then there was another group not with them that was able to take over. And obviously, you know, as events turned out, it was fortuitous to do that.
Yeah. Indeed. There's a reason for all these things, isn't there?
Exactly. Yes, indeed.
So we'll come on to that in a bit. So the journey south, what was that like? What was your morale like? What was the banter like?
Well, so Two Para was split into two groups. The majority of people went on the Norland, which was a sort of a North Sea ferry ship. Because I was still in the MT before we broke up into the defence platoon, I went on a smaller boat that was again it was a smaller ferry. It was called the MV Europic, and so I was on there. We drove the Land Rovers down. We basically set sail several times, in fact, I think, and from Portsmouth. And yeah, it was an interesting journey. We didn't do as much training as happened on the Norland. They kind of left us alone for a bit. So it was there was no kind of like heavy drinking. Obviously, you know, there was a limit on the booze that you could have. There's lots of work on sort of maintenance of the vehicles because at the time we still anticipated we would use them. It was just like a sort of it was a bit of a cruise. Certainly when we got down as far as I think we were at Sierra Leone, you know, it was really, really hot. It was so hot in the boat that everyone would you know take the mattresses and sleep on deck. So it's so hot. Wow. So a lot of people think of like the Falklands, getting down there and you've got all your warm clothes on. Actually, you know, on the way down there, it was quite warm, you know, in certain places when we got around the equator.
Well, if you're sleeping on deck of I love the way you call it a boat as well. The people from the Royal Navy were going to love this. But don't change it. Yeah, that's good value as far as I'm concerned. So it must have obviously been quite warm. So was there any sense that this was going to come to a shooting war, or was it still, you thinking this will all be sorted out? Or
well, I guess I assume my working assumption was that it would all be over by the time we got there. I mean, it's different to the way it is today. There was no real history of the UK being involved in any armed conflicts other than Northern Ireland up to that time. And obviously, you know, the UK was like a NATO power. You know, it was. I assume that there would be discussions, that it would be a diplomatic resolution before we got down there. So, you know, once I didn't take it seriously, but my assumption was that it would be sorted by the time we got down there. I think the first time it kind of dawned on me that something real was going to happen, or there was a massive potential for something real to happen, was when we got cross-decked from the Europic to the Norland. So the helicopters lifted us across because they wanted all of Tuparo in one place for the landing. And, it was at that point I started thinking, I'd probably better take this a bit more seriously. That kind of drew it home to me. But, it was great to be on the Norland because you saw all your pals and friends who you hadn't seen for, like a couple of weeks. So it was good being there. And I think when we actually, it became apparent we were going ashore and we were going to land, I think one of my first thoughts was, at least I'll get off this frigging boat at last, because we've been. I'm not a natural sailor, and I've been on it now for for quite a few weeks. So I think one of my first thoughts was, at least I'll get on dry land.
Mm. Your job is to jump out of planes, not be on boats.
Exactly that. Yeah.
So how did the landings go? What was going through your mind?
It was chaotic, I think, because, as you say, we weren't natural beach landing people. I seem to remember the kit that people were carrying was exceptionally heavy, especially for specialist teams like the mortars and the anti-tanks. And some of those guys, they were carrying so much equipment that they would need help to stand up. You couldn't stand up. They couldn't stand up on their own. And I mean, I remember packing my rucksack and my Bergen. It was really loaded, and then someone would come over and say, "Okay, can you take 2 mortar shells as well? Can you take 50 rounds of ammunition as well?" And so by the time you got into the landing craft, it was just everyone was loaded down. Everyone was packed to the gunnels,
So you obviously depart the landing craft, probably not running by the sounds of things, but so I guess it's about digging in then, was it?
Well, no. So the idea was that we would land at Blue Beach, and then we would march up to the Sussex Mountains and dig in up there, because that was a defensible position. As I say, it was quite chaotic when we landed. It took a while to get organised. I think the thought was that we would be dug in and waiting for whatever the consequence was by first light. However, by first light, we were still in a battalion snake marching up the hill towards Sussex Mountains. As I remember it, that was when I saw the first sort of Argentine. It was a Pucara aircraft flew towards us, and every air raid warning red. Everyone was shouting that it's an enemy aircraft. And then I saw this. It's difficult to describe it. It was almost like a firework in the distance going off. And it was a very, very kind of graceful arc as this firework headed towards the Pucara. And then there was a little pop, and the pilot ejected, and the plane went into a spin and came down a few miles from us. And apparently that was the first use or the first active use in combat of the Stinger anti-aircraft missile. So that was one thing. And once that was down, everyone just picked the kit up again and staggered off towards the hills, and we got into the hills, and then we were sort of assigned to our various areas, and we started digging in trenches and overhead cover, etc. And then we waited for further orders.
And what happened next?
Well, we were there for a while. I don't remember exactly, a week maybe, but 4 or 5 days. I can't remember the exact time. But we got sort of like a grand view of the bomb alley and of the Argentine planes coming in and bombing the ships. If they flew over to Paris position, then obviously we opened fire with all the weapons. We were asked not to, because obviously a waste of ammunition. But temptations there, isn't it? As they come over, we'll just have a few pops at them. I think we did claim a couple of pucaras and what were they, skyhawks, I guess. As they came over, as we you'd get this. Sometimes you'd get this sort of mist of avgas, of aircraft fuel. So yeah, I'd like to think that some of our rounds hit them, and if not brought them down directly, meant that they couldn't actually make it back to base.
I love the way you said that. I can just imagine how it went. You were asked not to shoot at them. Is that exactly how it went?
We were directed not to shoot at them.
I can imagine the response if you had been asked politely.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
So, am I right in thinking that where you were dug in your positions, you weren't targeted a great deal, and then that the Argentine Air Force was targeting the ships in Bomb Alley? Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, it was difficult to see us because we were cammed up, and plus, if you've got limited bombs, you're going to want to focus on a visible target rather than where we might be. I mean, you still. If you're seeing a plane coming over at very, very low altitude, you're still going to panic a bit. So you might still be, crouched in your trench, but it doesn't stop you putting a few rounds their way just to let them know you're still there.
Okay. So when did the order come to move out of those positions?
I can't remember. I think we were there for, as I say, we were there for a period of time, whether it was a week or 2 weeks or whatever.
That does sound like a long time, Gary, to me. Did it feel like a long time to you at the time?
It did. Well, it did because obviously we were kind of living rough, and it was getting colder and colder as the winter came in. But I think there was debate at I don't know, senior military levels as to what to do next. So whether to crack on to Stanley and attack Stanley, or whether to take out Goose Green. I think it's still kind of debated as to which option would have been best. I think the problem that they had was that obviously we'd lost the Atlantic conveyor, had been sunk, and a lot of the helicopters, 2 or 3 Hueys on there, that would have been sort of essential to try and lift everyone. If the intention had been to move straight to Stanley, then a lot of our heavy lift capability had gone. So I think there was a lot of debate. I think, from a political side, they wanted to see a victory.
Yeah.
They wanted to see, okay, they're down there. What are they doing? And I think General Chapman said that, every day that we were there, people were getting trench foot. People would things were going wrong. We were losing every day we were there. We needed to do something. And Goose Green was the something that we did.
So tell me about Goose Green, please.
Well, we set off. I remember setting off at night. We're carrying. I think we left rucksacks behind. Everyone was just loaded up with as much ammunition as they could take. Everyone got given. I think we only took 2 mortar tubes. Everyone got given 2 mortar rounds to carry with them as well. We set off at night. And then we got as far, I think it was, I can't remember the name of the place we're at now. I'd have to look it up. But we stopped at a house, and we reformed there, waiting for the attack that was going to happen the following night. I ended up in. So they kind of broke the battalion up into various groups to get their head down. My section commander came back to me and said, "We've got great news. We've got a peat shed." Now I'm from a sort of a semi-rural area, and thinking of a peat shed, a barn, I thought that sounds great, because I've been sleeping out in the open for like the last few days, few weeks. And I don't know if you've ever been in a peat shed, but it's like
I'm waiting for your description, because I certainly haven't.
It's peat. I kind of thought it'd be like soil, but it's like coal. It's just like there was this shed that only had 2 sides on it, and what I can only describe as a massive pile of coal in the middle. And they said, "Right, get your heads down here. So it was a massive scramble to get to the top of the pile of coal, because if you got on the lower levels of it, if anyone moved above you, all the coal would rain down on your head. So it was probably one of the most uncomfortable and coldest nights I'd had for some time at that point.
Perfect preparation for a night assault.
Exactly.
Then.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, there was certainly like an urge to get out of there and do something else. That's for certain.
So when did the instructions come? When did the orders come?
Well, so the CO had his O group, and he got people in and briefed them. I wasn't obviously there as a private soldier, as a Tom. I wasn't kind of privy to that, but the orders kind of drift down to the various sort of for the rifle companies and to the platoons, and then down to the sections. And like basically our instructions were to be assigned to TAC 2 to work with TAC 2 and see where, basically under the direction of Chris Keeble, to see where Chris Keeble wanted to go. So we headed off. I think initially it's hard as well to kind of judge the progress against the plan when you're stumbling along in the dark. It seemed to be going really well, and then we went firm. We stopped at this one particular area where the RSM came over and said, right, we're going to be here for some time, so you need to dig a shell scrape. So everyone started digging these shell scrapes, which is like a shallow trench, just to give you some cover, because there's absolutely no cover there whatsoever. And at that point, we started getting mortared. And, you can imagine it, you're digging your shell scrape half-heartedly. And a mortar bomb goes off, some distance away, and they're obviously trying to, direct it onto you. And you move into like human mole mode, and you're digging away as fast as you can. And it's funny. It's a funny thing. Well, it's a funny thing being mortared, because initially it's just sheer terror. Obviously, as you're lying face down in your little shell scrape, and you can hear shrapnel flying over you, you can hear the explosion. But after like a minute or two, it gets a bit boring, I mean, there's not really a lot you can do other than just lie flat and wait, and then I was lying flat in my trench. And then I could smell smoke. So obviously someone in a trench nearby had lit up and was smoking. And then I could smell coffee brewing. And I was thinking, well, I might as well join them. So I got my little stove out and brewed up some hot water, had a coffee.
Whilst you're being mortared?
Oh, we'd been mortared, yeah. I mean, it's not like I was going anywhere.
It's probably best not to, no.
And so I had a drink, and I think I probably dozed off for a bit as well, because obviously I hadn't slept well for quite a few nights, and so yeah. And then after, I don't know how long it was, 3/4 of an hour maybe, it got less, and then they kind of lost interest, I guess, and then we all got up and packed our stuff, and off we went again.
So where did you head to next? What was the next objective?
Well, we moved forward behind the battalion. Basically, as the rifle companies moved forward, we moved forward with them, or in kind of parallel to them. I think the next thing that I remember was obviously no one called me directly, but I remember the word coming round from some of the other guys, especially like the signallers, that the CO had been hit. I don't recall hearing Sunray is down, but I remember hearing that the CO has been hit quite badly, that the adjutant, who I knew quite well through the skydiving, had also been hit and might be dead. So obviously it was quite a shock, the CO is sort of like God in the battalion. So it was quite a shock. And I think that the OC of A Company, had called Chris Keeble and said, you better get up here pretty quick. We've got a situation. So we set off at sort of quite a pace. And then when we got to sort of the foot of Darwin Hill, and I think I've said before, when we got there, the situation was pretty dire. CO was dead, the adjutant was dead, 2IC of A Company was dead. Some of the best soldiers in the battalion had been killed. There was loads of people wounded. It was a pretty, it was a pretty shocking situation when we got there. Chris Keeble went off with Dare Farrah Hockley, who was the OC of A Company. Well, they planned what to do next. And his last sort of instructions to us was, get to the medic, the RMP, the regimental medical post, and see what you can do, see how you can help. So we headed up there, and indeed there were a lot of casualties there, and we'd been there for a short period of time when a guy called Captain Mike Ford, came running down from the top of Darwin Hill, and he said, "Okay, we've got a bit of a problem. We've got a guy who's been badly wounded. I need some volunteers to come with me to try and get him back. He's exposed to enemy fire, so I'm going to need volunteers because, it's going to be quite hot up there." My section commander was excellent guy called Duncan Allen. He said, "You don't need volunteers, sir. We'll all go. My section will go." And you do get volunteered for things in the army, but I think at that stage, sort of stood amongst the sort of dead and some of the dying and badly wounded of A Company, you really wanted to do your bit. You really wanted to get stuck in and help. So we picked up a stretcher and we followed Ford up to the top of Darwin Hill. We kind of broke cover at the edge of the gorse line, and there was a short plateau sort of area, so we could hear all the shooting. We could see some of the rounds, tracer rounds coming up, but they couldn't actually see us at that point. So we ran forward with the stretcher. At the same time, we could see runners from A Company and D Company who were below us on Darwin Hill on the reverse slope. They were coming back for ammunition. They were getting ammunition, running backwards and forwards. Other casualties, walking wounded, were being helped back. We kind of ran past them to sort of the lip of the plateau. And we went over the lip of the plateau, and then I got my sort of first look, if you like, at Goose Green and the situation. The schoolhouse was on fire. Goose Green was off to the left. But as the old saying goes, when the enemy are in range, so are you. And we started taking quite heavy incoming fire as we were effectively silhouetted as we come over the lip of the plateau. At that point, Captain Ford, I'm not exactly sure what happened. I think perhaps the casualty wasn't where Captain Ford thought he was. And he said to us, "Right, can you guys stay here? I'm going to go and find him." And he ran off. And the problem that we had was obviously the enemy had now seen us. And we were taking quite heavy incoming fire. We spread out, we got flat. Me and a few of my comrades sort of fired back, but it was very difficult to see where the enemy rounds were coming from. We could see the tracer rounds from the D Company and C Company guys below us where they were striking, and we were aiming at those stroke points actually. But to be fair, I think we probably drew more fire on ourselves rather than suppressing anything. My comrade Tony Yarwood said, "Stay here for much longer, we're going to be in big trouble," because they could see us and the fire was increasing. And at that point, Ford came back again and he said, "Okay, I found him, let's go." So we jumped up and we ran down the hill a bit further. There was a shot up Land Rover, and then behind the Land Rover, there was a medic called Bill Bentley, and we came across the casualty. There was a guy called Dave Chopsy Gray, and he was badly wounded. He'd lost a leg. I think his other leg was in a bit of a state as well. So we got down, we got him on the stretcher. I put my hand on his face just to kind of calm him, put my hand on his head, just to say, it's okay, Chopsy, we've got you now. And he had like it was kind of funny because he looked like he was soaking in sweat, but he was very, very cold to the touch. I remember Bill Bentley had written M on his forehead for morphine, but it's sweating so much it was kind of already sort of smudging off. We got him on the stretcher, and then there was a sergeant called Spencer, I think, and he kind of took over at that point, and he said, "Right, give me your rifles, pick up the stretcher, follow me." You could hear the enemy rounds hitting the other side of the Land Rover, so they knew where we were. So we set off at quite a pace. As we started going back up the reverse side of Darwin Hill, Spanner Spence was screaming at us to go right, which was obviously not up the hill. It took a couple of sort of minutes for me to figure out what was going on, and basically, if you're trying to hit a moving target, it can be very, very difficult, even one carrying a stretcher. But if they're going in a straight line, if you simply aim well in front of them and keep your finger on the trigger, they'll run into your rounds, they'll run into your fire. The only thing you can really do is zigzag, and that's what Spanner was trying to get us to do. So, I mean, everyone on that stretcher past P Company had done it's a test on P Company, the stretcher race. Everyone had passed it, but I don't think any of us had ever carried a stretcher up a hill zigzagging with a badly wounded man on while you're under heavy automatic fire.
Yeah.
So it was a struggle. It was a real struggle. But we got him over the lip, and then we weren't exposed to their fire anymore. I mean, everyone was absolutely exhausted. We put him down. I think someone was sick. One of the guys called Pete High put his hand on Chopsy's throat, and he said, "Yeah, he's still alive, but we probably haven't got that much longer." So we changed positions. So if you'd been on the left, you'd be on the right. We picked him up and we set off again. I think someone ran ahead to let the medics know that he was coming in. We went back across the plateau, through the gorse bush, down to the medic centre, to the regimental aid post. As soon as we got there, the medics were waiting for him. They jumped on him. They've got drips, tourniquets, and everything. We moved off after we dropped him off. We moved off. Everyone sat down, and Duke came back down again, and he said, "Right, well done, lads, great effort. We're going to have to go and get another one now." So off we went again. I think the next one we picked up, was already dead. So yeah, it was a busy old day, that's for sure. But the good news on it was that Chopsy survived. They managed to stabilise him. Excellent effort by the medical team. They managed to stabilise him. He was evacuated to Uganda, and he survived the war. So I felt if I haven't done anything else, then we managed to save him.
Do you still talk to him?
He unfortunately he's passed away. Passed away when, but was it now? Probably early 2000s. He had a number of problems after he left the army. Yeah, he got a good job. I think he had 2 daughters. But yeah, unfortunately, he's gone now, sadly.
Oh, that's a shame.
Yeah. But after that, I mean, it was quite everyone was sort of, at the end of the day there, it was at the end of the battle, it was that the Argentines had basically fallen back. They were just in Goose Green and maybe just on the outskirts of it. I think B Company had moved to sort of south of their position, so they were effectively surrounded. And then we sort of, we were trying to get some sleep. We had loads of prisoners we had to guard. One of the funny things that I noted while we were there was that the ground itself was baking hot. I think probably due to the explosions and the explosives set fire to the ground. As I think it's all peat, but we don't know a lot about peat now. But it was absolutely baking hot, so hot that if you lay on your stomach, you'd basically be cooking. But it started snowing, so your back would be really cold, but your front would be really hot. So you had to keep turning over. One of the guys that had been, he just sort of crashed out. He had a couple of 66 mortar rounds, like the Law, the anti-tank rocket launcher, which we were using. And he fell asleep on one of them, and then when he woke up, it had melted. The plastic on it had melted. It was that hot.
I'm not an expert on like anti-tank weapons, but melted plastic, probably not a good idea.
It's not a good look. No. We had to get rid of that pretty sharpish. We just put it a fair distance away. And then with that, so the next morning, obviously everyone's wondering what's going to happen. And Chris Keeble had been negotiating with the Argentines at Goose Green, so they surrendered. They decided they were going to surrender, which is obviously very well received by us, because everyone was on their chin straps and we were very, very low on ammunition. So we marched into Goose Green. We saw some of the Argentines for the first time. They were obviously disarmed. They were put into the sheep shearing sheds, and then we were allocated to stop with some of the Falkland Islanders who had been in the hut in the village hall, community centre, whatever, at Goose Green. So they were let back to their houses. They had to be very, very carefully checked by the engineers first, because there were booby traps in some of them. Some of the places have been left in like appalling conditions. Some of them had crapped in the freezers and all sorts of things. It was disgusting. And working parties were taken from the POWs to go and clean the places up. So obviously the engineers would make sure everything was okay, no more booby traps or anything, and then we'd take the prisoners in and be made to clean up the mess that they'd left, basically. So that was the first sort of stage at Goose Green. It was the first day or two. It was just trying to get your head around what had just happened, I think one of probably the worst jobs that I had in the army was one of my section commanders came round and said, "Oh, you used to be in D Company, didn't you?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, I've got a really bad job for you. You need to get up to we've got the snowcats had reached us by then, these vehicles, trap vehicles. Can you go up to D Company and bring the bodies back of the fallen?" So I went up there, and myself and one of the D Company guys came down, a guy called Taff Rees, Wayne Rees, and I'd loaded some of the bodies on. He's going to be very careful. I felt like I had to be very careful. I didn't want to stack people on top of each other, so I was trying to put them in, trying to be respectful. It's your friends. I put them where I could. And then Taff came down. He had another body on over his shoulder, and he said, "I said, oh God, not another one. Who's this?" And he said, "It's Sess Sykes, who was another really good friend." And I was trying to figure out where to put him, and there was where I had intended to sit. There was like a little space at the back, so I kind of sat him down there. And as I sat him down, the hood, he was in a sleeping bag, but kind of the hood dropped off, and it kind of exposed his face. And as I looked at him in kind of shock, he opened his eyes and he said, "Oh, it's all right, guys, I'm not dead. I've just got exposure." I really shit myself. I was, and Taff, he was laughing at me, and he said, "Oh, didn't I tell you he wasn't dead, bastard?" So Cess he'd fallen in a pool or something. Anyway, he was wet through, and he'd got exposure. So they wanted to take him back to that HQ to try and warm him up a bit, give him some more clothes. So me and Cess sort of sat in the back of the snowcat with the dead, and we took them all back to base to be sort of like I don't know, processed, whatever, buried,
Where would the armed forces be without banter?
It's kind of a black humour, isn't it? But it keeps you going through it. It's just you get into a situation where it's so horrific that you've just got to take the piss out of it.
Yeah, it's like a way of processing it, I guess, isn't it?
It is, yeah. You just can't. It's hard to take it all in. I mean, it took me a while to, I don't know what the word would be, come to terms with it, but it was, people that I joined up with. There's a guy called Nigel Smith. Now, I joined up with Nigel when I was 16, and I'd been through pretty much every level of training with him. And like it had half his head blown off, and they'd got like a helmet over the remainder of it to try and just so he didn't have to see it. But it was just, it was hard. It was really hard.
I can't imagine what that must be like, Gary. I really can't.
It's you can't kind of dwell on it. You've got to move on. That's the only thing you can do. And your friends wouldn't want you standing there mourning over them. You've got to crack on and get the job done.
So cracking on, what happened next?
Well, we had one more incident that happened when I was there. Was there was a load of ammunition next to the Argentine accommodation in the sheep shearing sheds. And I believe that they had asked for it to be moved because obviously, a shed load of ammunition there, it could explode. And I think our take on it was, okay, we can move it, but we want your guys to move it. So there was a party, one of these working parties that had been clearing the house, got delegated to move the ammunition. Now, while they were moving the ammunition, I know I've heard a number of stories. One that it was booby-trapped, which I guess is possible. Others that it was just unstable because it had been left outside for so long. But anyway, there was an explosion, and I believe 2 Argentines were killed there. Obviously it was a shock for the rest of the battalion. I mean, you heard this explosion, you could hear rounds being fired because it set off ammunition, and I think the bulk of the battalion believed that we were being counterattacked. So everyone was running to positions and that. But yeah, sadly 2 prisoners were killed in there, and that was pretty bad. It was obviously from the Argentine perspective, professional organisation, the army. We don't, if we get prisoners, we try and look after them.
Of course.
What happened after that? So then I'd been pretty unwell. I had a bit of food poisoning while we were there, and I think 2 para then moved off to Fitzroy Settlement to form up then for the attack on Stanley. At that point, 5 Brigade had arrived on the QE2, And I think, they were in, or some of them were in the boats, had been put ashore. I think Scots Guards had been put ashore. But anyway, I was delayed at Goose Green for a while, and then I went off on a boat. It's called the Monsoon. I might be wrong. And they dropped me off at. They dropped at me and lots of ammunition, and possibly a couple of Gurkhas as well off Fitzroy. I remember some of the Scots Guards coming ashore. I remember there being some discussion why the Welsh Guards wouldn't come ashore. Obviously there's a lot being said about it because it's subsequently blown up, but I wasn't really, privy to any of the conversations that were going on. It was an absolute tragedy and a tragedy that didn't need to happen. But I was sat on guard. We kind of rotating guards. Saw the planes come in. We saw heard the bombs. I didn't actually see the planes being hit, the boats being hit. We went running over as fast as we could. Just dropped everything and just ran over, try and get them out of the water. When I got over there, I think most of the seriously wounded guys had already been taken off, because when I got there, we were pulling people in off boats, some people in life jackets and stuff where we're kind of swimming in, and we were just grabbing them and pulling them ashore. I saw a few people with some wounds. I didn't see anyone badly wounded or that badly wounded. So when we got back to Fitzroy, and I heard that fifth, I think it was 48, 49 were dead, and there were loads more seriously wounded. I was kind of stunned by it. It was because I personally hadn't seen that amount of casualties. I can only think that the majority of them had got off or been taken off and taken back to medic centres by the time I got there. But again, that was a huge shock. They came back as well. The Argentines came back a bit later on to try and I don't know, finish it off, I guess. And I just remember, we were waiting for them this time, and I remember like a whole sort of like obviously when you fire around, you've got tracer rounds. You just see all these tracers going up at them. You could see them. They veered off and then they didn't come back again. It was almost like a blanket of tracer going up after the planes. And then that was it. Then they didn't come back again. We were there then. We remained at sort of Fitzroy for a while. There was some sort of talk about moving us out because obviously the Argentines now knew we were at Fitzroy, and they didn't want, obviously the British didn't want bombs dropped on Fitzroy settlement with all the civilians there. So that the thought was that we would move everyone off out of Fitzroy and set up at another sort of tactical area outside Fitzroy. But I think we started digging trenches, and then we got the order that we're all off to. For the final attack, the final push. Now, I don't remember whether we marched all the way there or whether we got helicopter some of the way. I can't remember that. I just remember. I think my next big memory is we went behind Three Para when they attacked Mount Longdon, and I can remember like the artillery going in. I can remember seeing the tracers coming up from the support fire machine guns, and then you have this kind of really weird effect that you see the flash of the explosion, and then a couple of seconds later you can hear the shell going over, and you can hear the bang. So you hear the flash, then you hear the whistle as the shell goes over, then you hear the explosion. Obviously like light traveling faster than sound, but yep. It's really weird and it's really disorientating if you're underneath at the time. So we went round behind the back of Three Para, and I think the thought was that if there was any if Three Para needed support, then we were there. But we went round the back of Three Para, And then the next night, obviously 3 Paragon was successful under heavy odds and managed to take Mount Longdon. And then we kind of formed up for the attack on Goose Green. As the attack sort of kicked off, the Argentines launched an aircraft attack, and I was hit with I got hit with one of the bombs that they dropped. I got a bit of shrapnel in my back, and a bit of sort of like a bit of the plastic explosive was on my legs. My leg was on fire for a bit.
Crikey.
But I mean, it wasn't like disabling. I could still kind of function, you know. So I managed to put the fire out. A section commander and the team came down. You know, are you okay? I remember squeezing the back of my jumper. I had like a woolly jumper on, and I could feel all the blood in the back of my jumper when I squeezed it. You know, and I was thinking, I need to get someone to look at this. So I went off. You know, they give me, you know, told me to go up to the medic tent. I went up to see the medics. They said, "Yep, you've been hit, and it's you know, it needs to come out, because otherwise, you know, you can get gangrene and you know, you could be in a bad way. So we're going to ship you out in the morning." So I went back and told my section commander that I was off, and you know, I'd try and get back as soon as I could. But they shipped me back to Blue Beach, so I got a helicopter back to Blue Beach. I went to the it's called the Red and Green Life Machine. So Rick Jolly's field hospital.
Yep.
I had to have the shrapnel out, which was exceptionally painful, especially because when I landed off the chopper. And I guess I was going into shock. I was exceptionally thirsty, so I had a drink of tea from one of the medics there. And as soon as I got in to the hospital part of it, they said, "Right, we need to take shrapnel out. Have you had anything to eat and drink in the last 48 hours?" And I said, "Yes, I've just had a cup of tea." And they said, "Right, we can't give you a general anaesthetic then. So we're gonna have to take it out." So so they kind of like track up where the shrapnel's gone. They cut it out, and then they cut wherever, you know, they basically cut the track of the shrapnel up you.
Yep.
And take it out. I did have the piece of shrapnel, but I think I must have lost it over the years. But a big chunk of metal, you know. So anyway, after that, I got shipped back to the helicoptered me out to the SS Uganda, and that was kind of the battle side of it over for me. After that, I got one of the survey ships. So I was on the Uganda for a day or two, and then I got one of the survey ships. I think it was Hydra, and they basically took us back from SS Uganda to Montevideo to drop us off. It's in Chile, as we later found out. Trying to think if anything happened on there. I remember, I think on my first night on the Hydra, I was in like a bunk. I found it really hard to sleep because obviously, you know, with the wound in the back, I had to pretty much lie on my stomach all the time. So I went down to the mess deck, and there was one of the sailors there who was waiting, reading a book, and he was surrounded by these huge packs of beer. He said, "All of this is for you guys. Just help yourself." But I mean, I hadn't had a drink for probably about 4 or 5 weeks. So I managed 2 cans, and I thought, okay, that's it. I'm gonna get my head down now. And then when we got to Montevideo, we got shipped to the airport. I got bus to the airport. Funny enough, I didn't really have any kind of perception of how the Chileans and the Argentinians thought of each other. But there were people cheering as we left the airport in the bus. People waving and cheering and stuff. So obviously there must have been some Antigua, and they didn't get on.
No, I don't think they liked each other much, did they?
No. And I don't remember much about the airport other than when we got on the planes, they were kind of split, and there was like a seated part, and there was like stretcher part. So I sat down for takeoff, but I couldn't kind of lean back because of my back. And after we'd taken off, one of the stewardesses or nurses, I wasn't sure what they were, she said, why don't you go and have a lie down on one of the stretchers? So I went, lay down for a bit. And she said, I can give you some sleeping pills if you like. I've never had sleeping pills up to that point, or indeed after. So I'm like, yeah, okay, I'll drop a couple. Next thing I knew, we woke up at Ascension Islands. Sort of come round, had a cup of tea and a sandwich or something. And then she said, right, we're off back to Briars Norton. Do you want another sleeping pill? Yeah, okay. So, and then we were back at Briars. I think from Briars we went to, I think it was called the Princess Margaret Hospital, which I believe is used to be just outside Swindon. I think it's all knocked down now. It's probably a housing estate now. So we got shipped there, and then my mum and dad and my family came and picked me up from there. We were there for quite a while trying to get. I mean, it was chaos because people were turning up, and people wanted to welcome us back and everything. And in the end, I just said to my dad, "Come on, let's go. I'll give them a ring when we get home." Yeah. So and that was kind of the end of it for me.
So do you think it's important to share your story? Because, I mean, we've talked about this before, and I think you do attach an importance to that. Am I right in thinking that?
Yeah, I think it's really important. I think, that to some extent, the Falklands is a forgotten war. And I think it's really important that while the people who fought in it are still around, that we tell people, because it was a massive success. I mean, people quite often ask me, do you think it was worth it? People who know what I went through, is it worth it? And I think, yeah, I think there was a massive impact in possibly like three areas, really. One, for the British Army, at the time, if you think about it, it might be going back there now. At the time, the British Army was just focused on armour. It was like the Russians or the Soviets coming across the plains. We have to have tanks, and so the paras was kind of like, we were seen as not an essential part of the army. And I think the Falklands, when there was no way you're going to get tanks or anything over there, I think this woke a lot of people up in the senior parts of the army to the advantages you've got of having troops who could do the sort of things that we could do, and so we went from being on the point of being disbanded and sucked into other infantry units to being, well, I won't say untouchable, but untouchable. But people really appreciated what we could do and the advantages of having a group of men like the paras that you could call on in times of trouble, who could go in there and sort things out. I think I've said it before. I think if you can say like the para edge was part of the thing that saved the Falklands, then the reverse is also true. I think the Falklands War, by demonstrating what the paras could do, saved to a degree saved the parachute regiment. So I think it had that regimental, that army impact. I also think it had like a UK impact. I mean, it had an impact on people who knew me. So at my generation, which I think I was 22 at the time, so it had an effect on the younger generation. It had an effect on my dad's generation, who could remember the war, and my granddad's generation. It kind of brought the country together because everyone had a stake in what had happened and knew someone, knew of someone, or knew of a similar situation, during the wartime, where we're celebrating winning a war after sort of like almost years of stagnation. I think there was a UK impact people are coming together, if you like, of various generations. And I think the Falklands caused that, or influenced that, shall we say. I think there's also a worldwide impact. I mean, I think, up to that point, I don't think either the Russians or Americans thought we would be successful. So when it actually happened, I think it was a wake-up call for perhaps the Americans and the Russians, and perhaps even some of our European allies, to understand exactly what the British Army was capable of, and also at a government level, I think, I stand to be corrected on this, but I think, at the time, the British troops were in Belize. Once it had happened, once the invasion had happened, Honduras moved a lot of troops to the border because, they might have thought, well, if they're not going to fight for their own people in the Falklands, would they fight for the Belizeans? And then after the success, they stood down because they knew that we would fight and not only fight to make a point, we would fight to win. I think that message went round the world that the British Army had people who could do these sort of things, and the organisation and the will to do them.
And the people, Gary, and the people, including
absolutely.
yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, very true.
And many others as well. I just want to say thank you so much. But I must admit, we could, the impact of the Falklands, we could talk about as probably a whole nother hour, I think. But unfortunately, we don't have time. But I just want to say thank you so much for sharing that, because I'm sure it can't be easy necessarily going back over those experiences before. But I do think you're right in what you say. I think it's important that we share your experiences and others so that, younger generations and future generations are aware of what happened. I think you're absolutely right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Now, before Stephen might look back at the interview we've just heard, you may be interested to know that here at Company of Makers, we've got loads of online activities for veterans to get involved in. As well as this podcast, we've got online talks with inspiring guests, and we've got workshops where you can learn something new and meet like-minded people from the forces. To find out more, sign up for our newsletter and we'll send all the latest updates direct to your inbox. Just head over to companyofmakers.com/newsletter. Now back to Steve and Mike.
So, another interesting story there, Mike. I just as we started recording this, we would talk about Pete being on fire. And after we got over the confusion, you thought I was talking about an actual person. But the Pete was on fire.
Yes, I did. When you said that, I did think he didn't mention a Peter or Pete. What's he talking about? Bomford has clearly got out of bed the wrong side of this morning. But actually, when you then explained it was when they were sort of dug in and it was the peat bog started catching on fire and the melted plastic look. I remember what he said then. So thank you for correcting me.
That's okay. It's definitely not a good look, as Gary put it. But anyway,
definitely not a good one.
Enough of our confusion.
Yeah. So I mean, a really interesting comment he made right at the end of your discussion. About how the Paras helped save the Falklands, which is undoubtedly true, but also how the Falklands helped save the Paras. And I'd quite like to reflect on that a little bit, because I think there are some subjects here that will be a recurrent theme, that actually the Falklands happened in the shadow of the 1981 Strategic Defence Review, which largely said that a situation or a scenario like the Falklands could never happen. And so, actually, the light sort of expeditionary troops like the Paras and the Royal Marines were, under the sword of Damocles. Their very existence had been questioned. The aircraft carriers were in the process of being sold to Australia. And all the capabilities that were necessary of winning back the Falklands after the invasion and liberating the Falkland Islanders that we've been talking about in this series, none of that would have been possible had another 6 months elapsed, and we'd lost the ability to launch aircraft from aircraft carriers or light expedition troop like the Marines and Paras from ships. So, yes, the Falklands did save the Paras.
Yes, and many more, I think. But we're not going to get political. Are we going to blame John Knott or not? Or are we just going to move on from that?
Well, this is not meant to be a political podcast, so I don't think we need to. I think most people have made up their own opinions about why. But anyway, let's go back to Gary, because he certainly was in the thick of it, and I quite like his sort of slightly deadpan approach in relating it, because actually what that hides is what must have been what a lot of us call the chaos or fog of war. I mean, he was part of the attack on Goose Green and Darwin, in which they lost their heroic and brave CO, H. Jones. He was, dug into shallow trenches, being mortared, and he said very matter-of-factly, after a while they got used to the mortars and started making coffee. Typically understated British humour. He witnessed Bluff Cove, and the Scots Guards got ashore, but the Welsh Guards didn't get ashore in time. And then very matter-of-factly, I got a bit of shrapnel in my foot, and that had to be taken out, they decided, because it might go gangrenous. And I mean, these are quite dramatic events, but he tells them in such a sort of matter-of-fact way. It betrays the amount of courage and commitment and emotion that must have been happening at the time.
Undoubtedly, yeah, and getting casualties off the battlefield so they can, to tents, to hospital. I'm sure there's a better phrase than that, but so people can be treated under fire. It's a serious business, and he was certainly in the thick of it. He
certainly was. I mean, early on, he does talk about, being detailed off to go and find a casualty called Private Chopsy Gray, and about how they managed to find him and get him back to safety. He was pretty cut up, but he lived, and he lived until I think the 2000s. And actually, that story is told in more detail by him in the accompanying book that is part of this campaign, so that listeners will be able to read more about that particular episode in the book.
Yeah, and you can find out about how to get the book at the end of the episode. But yeah, it's just so much happens in such a really short space of time, and the kind of, like you say, the fog of war, the chaos of war. You don't know what to expect next, do you?
No, and I'm sure he did this on purpose, but he obviously sailed south in one of the ships taken up from trade. In his case, it was the MV Europic, which was an ocean-going ferry, before being transferred to the MV Norland, another passenger ferry, right towards the end. And he kept on referring them to as boats. And because you made a comment on it, that actually the Navy calls those ferries ships, not boats. Boats are submarines or very small dinghies. Ferries are ships. So I'm sure he kept on saying it just to sort of have a dig at us Start Blues.
I don't think you're going to get any sympathy from a para, Mike. I'm sorry.
No. Well, anyway, and of course he came home by ship as well. So perhaps that was punishment enough for him. And like many of the discussions you've had with veterans, he also didn't believe that it would become a shooting war. As they were sailing south, he thought that it would be solved diplomatically. They all thought it would be solved diplomatically. And I think he said it was only when they got cross-deck to the Norland and were started giving instructions about the landings that he realised that actually this was serious and it would end up as a shooting war.
Yeah, I agree. And we also have got an episode about the MV Norland as well. And it's a very common theme that people thought, until things, the Belgrano, I think people thought it would all be solved diplomatically.
Yeah. And then he obviously got involved in, after they landed, they got involved in moving towards their first objective, which was to retake Goose Green and Darwin. And he said he never heard that now infamous, Sunray is down, radio call, but he had heard that the CO had been hit, and the adjutant too. In fact, actually, one of the two mobile headquarters that runs the battalion had been taken out. I can't imagine what was going through their minds when that happened, to carry on without their CO. But obviously they trained for that, and that's why they had a spare headquarter unit sort of waiting in the to take over, which is what happened. And obviously they then managed to capture Goose Green and Darwin, or retake Goose Green and Darwin, and that was his first experience of seeing Argentinians who had surrendered.
I think I've certainly got no experience of anything like this, but it says a lot for the fighting spirit of the regiment, doesn't it? When your leader, who was, by all accounts, extremely popular, quite charismatic, I think, has passed away in combat. That could also lead to disaster, couldn't it?
Yeah. I think it a great strength of that particular regiment about how well they managed to continue without their leader, and he would have laid the bones of that knowing that there was a succession plan to carry on without him. So it does says a lot. He saw a lot. He was at Fitzroy. We talked about Bluff Cove, and then of course he got hit with a bit of shrapnel, and that was the end of the Falklands War for him. So he had to be airlifted off. And then taken by a procession of ships, which he doesn't like, to Montevideo. So that must have been... I didn't really talk very much about it, but actually, that would have been quite an experience, going to Montevideo.
I think it would have been, and being cheered, he said, didn't he? Just, the Paraguayans, if I've got my geography right, were cheering them. Or was that the Marines?
Well, both of them. And I think and then he talked about, actually, his recollection was quite hazy, because he was, I think, mainlining sleeping pills at the time. And so actually the journey, both there and then the flight home to Brize Norton, he doesn't really remember much because he was asleep for most of it. Probably the best way to be honest, if you're travelling by RAF.
Is there no first class in RAF? I thought you travelled first class.
No. I think it's third class all round. To be honest, it's steerage.
Steerage.
I think we're all treated equally badly. I hope no one's listening from the RAF for this, but I'm sure they are. But
hold on, you exactly hope people from the RAF are listening to this.
Anyway, let's move on quickly and just say you asked him an interesting question towards the end about, is it important to share the story? And his view was, actually, a lot of people have never heard of the Falklands and the sacrifices made, and the whole principle of the right of self-determination, and he thought it was really important to keep those stories being told. So that's why he was happy to come up and have a chat with you, because I think he feels very strongly we mustn't forget.
And I couldn't agree more with that. I think it's extremely important. And as I've said in other episodes, I think if we can play a small part in those stories being remembered, that's got to be a good thing.
Yeah. I think you're absolutely right. And being very, very slightly political, if I may.
You may.
What the Falklands did teach us is, if someone tries to bully you and you stand up to them, even if it's 8,000 miles away, and you say, we'll try and solve it diplomatically, but if we don't, here's a task force to deal with you, to eject you, then you can preserve that right of citizens to be, determine the country they want to live in. And perhaps if we'd taken a stronger line with Russia over the annexation of Crimea in 2014, Ukraine might not be happening now.
I think you're absolutely right, but I think we would need to do a completely separate podcast series about the Ukraine. But you never know. You never know. We may get some guests on in the autumn who are actually there as journalists. We've got a few ideas there. But yes, I think you're absolutely right.
Oh, a mini-series on Ukraine. That would be fantastic.
Maybe an episode. But anyway, let's see. Let's not make any false promises.
Anyway, another brilliant discussion. Well done you on asking the right questions, and well done Gary on answering them like he did.
Yeah, thank you very much. And yes, I agree. Well done, Gary.
Hi, it's Mike here again. So just to let you know, this podcast accompanies the stunning Falklands 40th commemorative book produced by the Veteran.uk on behalf of the South Atlantic Medal Association, SAMA 82. And we'd like to say a really big thank you to both our funders for making this possible, namely the Veteran.uk and SAMA. And if you'd like to buy a copy of the book, then please head to either the Veteran.uk website or sama82.org.uk. Thanks for listening.
Before we finish, we'd love to hear from you. So if you've got any thoughts, suggestions, or even a bit of banter, just email us at podcast@companyofmakers.com. You never know, you might even get a mention. And don't forget to hit subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thank you. This podcast was produced by Rachel Owen, hosted by Mike Davis Marks, and me, recorded and edited by yours truly.
Company of Makers, podcast talks, workshops.